The wind howled like a wounded animal as Ethan McCrae urged his horse through the deepening snowdrifts, his lungs burning with each icy breath that cut through the wool scarf wrapped around his face. He had been riding for 3 hours through what had started as light flurries, but had transformed into a full-blown blizzard, the worst winter storm to hit the mountains of northern Nevada in 20 years. And now he could barely see 10 feet ahead through the swirling white chaos. His chestnut mare stumbled slightly, exhausted from fighting through snow that reached nearly to her chest in places, and Ethan knew they both needed shelter soon, or they would freeze to death out here in this merciless wasteland of white. It was December 1883. And Ethan had been working as a ranch hand for the Morrisons spread about 15 miles south of Eureka, Nevada, when the storm had caught him during what should have been a routine supply run to the mining town. He was 26 years old, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with dark hair that fell to his collar and gray eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship. His father had been a rancher who lost everything in a drought back in '79, and Ethan had been drifting from job to job ever since, never staying in one place long enough to call it home. He had learned to rely only on himself, to keep his heart locked up tight where it could not be broken by loss or disappointment. The shape emerged from the white curtain so suddenly that his mare shied sideways with a startled whinny. Ethan squinted through the driving snow and realized it was a covered wagon, tilted at an angle with one wheel deep in a drift. The canvas top flapped violently in the wind, and even through the storm he could hear a sound that made his blood run cold. A woman's scream, raw with pain and terror. He dismounted immediately, his boots sinking deep into the snow, and fought his way to the back of the wagon. When he pulled aside the canvas flap, he found her huddled inside among scattered supplies and blankets, her face pale as death except for 2 spots of fever-bright color on her cheeks. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with long chestnut hair that had come loose from its pins and clung damply to her forehead and neck. Her green eyes were wide with fear and pain as another contraction seized her, and she clutched at her swollen belly with both hands. "Please," she gasped when she saw him. "Please help me. The baby is coming." Ethan felt his heart slam against his ribs. He had delivered calves and foals plenty of times, but a human baby was something else entirely. Still, he could see from her desperate expression and the way her body was racked with contractions that there was no choice. The storm was too fierce to try to get her anywhere, and even if they could travel, the nearest town was hours away. "Where is your husband?" he asked, climbing into the wagon and pulling the canvas closed behind him to block out some of the wind. "Dead," she said through gritted teeth as another wave of pain hit her. "Pneumonia. 3 weeks ago. I was trying to get to Eureka, to my sister, but the storm came up so fast and the wheel broke and I cannot fix it alone, and then the pain started, and oh God, it hurts." Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush, and Ethan could see she was terrified. He moved closer and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the thick air inside the wagon. "My name is Ethan McCrae," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady even though his own heart was racing. "I am going to help you. What is your name?" "Willa," she said, her green eyes locking onto his like he was a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. "Willa Nelson, please do not let my baby die, please." "I will not let anything happen to either of you," Ethan promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Something about this woman, this stranger in a broken wagon in the middle of a blizzard, had already burrowed its way under his skin. He had spent years keeping himself separate from people, from caring too much, but in that moment, all his carefully constructed walls began to crumble. He assessed the situation quickly. The wagon provided some shelter from the wind, but it was still bitterly cold. They needed heat, light, and a much warmer space if Willa and her baby were going to survive the night. His eyes fell on the supplies scattered around the wagon bed. There were blankets, some cooking equipment, and what looked like pieces of furniture wrapped in canvas. "Can you hold on for just a few minutes?" he asked Willa. "I need to get my horse secured and gather some things." She nodded, biting her lips so hard he worried she would draw blood. Ethan squeezed her hand once more, then pushed back out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet, and the cold was so intense it felt like knives stabbing through his coat. He led his mare to the lee side of the wagon where there was slightly more shelter, then quickly unsaddled her and used the saddle blanket to rub down her coat as best he could. She would be cold, but she was a tough mountain horse and would survive the night if the storm did not get worse. He grabbed his saddlebags, which contained some jerky, a tin of coffee, and most importantly his flint and steel for starting fires. Then he fought his way back to the wagon, every step an exhausting battle against the wind and snow. Inside the wagon, Willa was crying softly, her face contorted with pain. "I am back," Ethan said, shaking snow from his coat and hat. "We need to make this space warmer. Do you have anything we can burn?" "There is wood," Willa gasped, "under the seat. My husband packed it. And there is a small stove. We were going to use it for cooking when we camped." Ethan found the pieces she mentioned and worked quickly to set up the small portable stove. It was designed for use inside tents and wagons, with a chimney pipe that could be vented through the canvas top. His fingers were so cold they barely worked, but he managed to get the pipe positioned, and then began building a fire with the wood and some kindling he found among the supplies. The flint and steel sparked once, twice, 3 times before finally catching, and he carefully coaxed the small flame to life. As the fire began to crackle and grow, warm light filled the wagon, casting dancing shadows on the canvas walls. Ethan fed more wood into the stove and felt the first blessed wave of heat beginning to radiate outward. Willa's face was still twisted with pain, but she looked at the fire with something like hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out here alone." "You are not alone," Ethan said firmly. He shrugged out of his heavy coat now that the space was warming and moved to her side. "Tell me what is happening. How long have you been having contractions?" "Since this afternoon," Willa said. "They started as just aches, but they have been getting stronger and closer together. I think my water broke about an hour ago before you arrived. Everything is wet, and I am so scared because I do not know what I am supposed to do. My mother died when I was young, and I never got to ask her about these things, and there is no one to help me." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness, so strong it nearly took his breath away. This woman had lost her husband, was far from her family, and was about to give birth in the worst possible conditions. But she was fighting with everything she had, and he would be damned if he let her down. "I have delivered plenty of animals," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "The principle should be similar. Nature knows what to do. We just need to help it along and keep you and the baby warm and safe." He began organizing the space, spreading blankets to create a cleaner area and heating water in a pot on the stove. The storm raged outside, shaking the wagon and howling through every gap in the canvas, but inside their small shelter the fire burned bright and the air grew warmer. Ethan found a lantern among the supplies and lit it as well, wanting as much light as possible for what was to come. Willa cried out again, her whole body going rigid with another contraction. Ethan took her hand and let her squeeze as hard as she needed, feeling the bones grind together but not flinching. When the pain passed, She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not usually so weak." "You are not weak," Ethan said fiercely. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You have been traveling alone, pregnant, in the middle of winter. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than words. Willa's green eyes searched his face, and Ethan found himself lost in their depths, in the vulnerability and strength he saw there. He had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something from cheap novels and fairy tales, but what he felt for this woman was undeniable and overwhelming. The hours that followed were the longest and hardest of Ethan's life. The contractions came faster and harder, each one tearing a scream from Willa's throat that cut him to the core. He did everything he could to make her comfortable, wiping her face with cool water from his canteen, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement when she sobbed that she could not do this, that it was too hard, that she wanted to give up. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You are doing it. Just a little longer, Willa. Stay with me." The storm outside reached a fever pitch, the wind shrieking like demons and the wagon rocking on its broken wheel. Snow found its way through every crack and gap, but Ethan kept the fire burning hot, feeding it carefully to maintain the heat without letting it get dangerous in such a small space. The firelight painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and in that warm glow Willa looked like something out of a dream, her face flushed and damp, her hair wild around her shoulders. Near midnight, Willa's screams took on a different quality, more urgent and desperate. Ethan positioned himself where he could see what was happening, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He could see the top of the baby's head, dark hair matted and wet, and he felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. "The baby is coming," he said. "Willa, you need to push. Can you do that?" "I cannot," she sobbed. "I am too tired. I cannot do it." "Yes, you can," Ethan said, moving to take both her hands in his. "Look at me, Willa, look at me." Her eyes met his, glazed with exhaustion and pain, but she focused on his face. "You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known," Ethan said, pouring every ounce of conviction into his words. "You have already come so far. Your baby is almost here, just a little more. Push with the next contraction." When the next wave hit, Willa screamed and bore down with everything she had left. Ethan moved back to catch the baby, his hands shaking but steady, and he saw more of the head emerge. Another contraction, another scream that seemed to tear the very air apart, and then suddenly the baby's head was out. Ethan supported it carefully, exactly as he had done with newborn foals, and waited for the next contraction. "One more," he said. "One more big push, Willa." She gathered herself, her face a mask of determination and agony, and when the contraction came she pushed with a guttural cry that came from the very depths of her soul. The baby slid out into Ethan's waiting hands in a rush of fluid and blood, and he nearly dropped it in his shock and awe. The infant was tiny and perfect, covered in white coating and blood, and for a terrible moment it did not make a sound. Ethan's heart stopped. He quickly cleared the baby's mouth and nose with his finger the way he had seen done with newborn calves, then rubbed its back vigorously with a clean cloth. "Come on," he thought desperately. "Breathe. Breathe." The baby suddenly let out a thin, wavering cry that built into a full-throated wail, and Ethan felt tears spring to his eyes. He wrapped the infant in the cleanest blanket he could find and held it close to the fire to warm it. "You have a son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Willa, you have a beautiful baby boy." Willa was crying and laughing at the same time, reaching for her child with trembling arms. Ethan carefully placed the baby on her chest, and the infant immediately quieted, nuzzling against his mother. The cord still connected them, pulsing gently, and Ethan knew he needed to deal with that. He heated his knife in the fire to sterilize it, then tied off the cord in 2 places with clean strips of cloth before cutting between them. His hands were steady now, all fear burned away by the miracle he had just witnessed. He covered mother and baby with every blanket he could find, making sure they were both warm and comfortable. The baby began to root against Willa's breast, and she helped him latch on with a wondering expression on her face. Ethan busied himself cleaning up as best he could, heating more water and washing his hands thoroughly. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the wagon there was peace and warmth and the incredible gift of new life. When everything was as settled as he could make it, Ethan sat back and looked at Willa and her son. She was exhausted, her face pale and drawn, but there was a soft smile on her lips as she gazed down at the baby. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at Ethan. "You saved our lives, both of us. I do not even know how to begin to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Ethan said. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No," Willa said firmly. "Not anyone. Most men would have ridden past in this storm, too worried about their own survival to stop. But you did stop. You stayed. You helped me bring my son into the world. That is not something I will ever forget." Their eyes met across the firelight, and Ethan felt that connection again, stronger than ever. He wanted to tell her that he would never have left her, that from the moment he heard her cry out he knew he would do anything to protect her, that in the space of a few hours she had become more important to him than his own life. But he held his tongue, not wanting to overwhelm her when she was so exhausted and vulnerable. Instead, he fed more wood into the stove and checked that the chimney was drawing properly. The wagon had warmed considerably, and with all the blankets piled on Willa and the baby they should stay comfortable through the night. Ethan positioned himself near the entrance, wrapped in his heavy coat, ready to tend the fire and watch over them both. "What will you name him?" he asked as the baby finished nursing and fell asleep in Willa's arms. "Thomas," she said without hesitation, "after my father, Thomas Nelson. He was a good man, and I hope my son will be the same." "I am sure he will be," Ethan said. "With a mother like you, how could he be anything else?" Willa smiled, her eyes already drifting closed with exhaustion. "Will you stay?" she asked sleepily. "I know the storm is bad, but I do not want to be alone." "I will stay as long as you need me," Ethan promised. "Sleep now, I will watch over you." Within minutes, Willa was asleep, one hand curved protectively around her baby. Ethan sat vigil through the long night, feeding the fire and listening to the storm gradually exhaust itself. He found himself unable to look away from Willa's face, peaceful now in sleep, or from the tiny baby bundled against her chest. Something fundamental had shifted inside him during this night. The walls he had built around his heart had not just crumbled, but had been completely swept away, and he knew with absolute certainty that he could never go back to his old life of drifting and solitude. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into a pristine wonderland of white. The sun rose in a brilliant blue sky, and the snow sparkled like millions of diamonds. Ethan carefully opened the canvas flap and looked out at the changed landscape. Everything was buried under at least 3 feet of snow, and drifts rose much higher in places where the wind had sculpted them. His mare stood nearby, covered in a dusting of white but otherwise unharmed. The main road, what he could see of it, was completely impassable. He heard movement behind him and turned to find Willa awake, the baby nursing again at her breast. She looked tired but much better than she had during the night, with color back in her cheeks and brightness in her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft so as not to disturb the baby. "The storm has stopped." "It has," Ethan confirmed, "but we are snowed in. The road is buried. It will be at least a day or two before anyone can get through, maybe longer." He expected her to look worried, but instead Willa just nodded calmly. "Then I suppose you are stuck with us for a while longer." "I cannot think of anywhere I would rather be," Ethan said honestly, and felt his face heat when he realized how forward that sounded. "I mean, I want to make sure you and Thomas are safe before I leave." "I know what you meant," Willa said with a small smile that made Ethan's heart skip. "And I am grateful. I do not know what I would have done without you." Over the next 2 days, as they waited for the snow to melt enough for travel, Ethan and Willa talked more than Ethan had talked to anyone in years. He told her about his childhood on his father's ranch, about watching everything fall apart during the drought, about the years he had spent drifting from place to place. She told him about growing up in Missouri with her sister, about meeting and marrying her husband Jacob, who had wanted to try his luck in the Nevada silver mines, about his death from pneumonia just 3 weeks earlier. "I was devastated," Willa admitted, looking down at baby Thomas sleeping in her arms. "We had not been married long, only 18 months, but he was a good man and I loved him. When he died, I did not know what to do. My sister Clara wrote and said I should come to Eureka, that she and her husband would help me. So I sold everything we had except what I could fit in the wagon and started traveling. I wanted to get there before the baby came, but I moved too slowly. The pregnancy made me tired, and the wagon was hard to manage alone." "You are incredibly strong to have made it as far as you did," Ethan said. "Most people would not have even tried." "I had no choice," Willa said simply. "I could not stay where I was with no money and no family. At least in Eureka, I will have Clara." Ethan felt his chest tighten at the reminder that Willa had a destination, a plan that did not include him. Over the past 2 days, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. He loved the way she smiled when Thomas made tiny baby sounds in his sleep. He loved how capable she was, already managing to care for her newborn despite her exhaustion and the difficult circumstances. He loved her dry sense of humor and the way she listened when he talked, really listened, like his words mattered. He loved everything about her, and the thought of saying goodbye was like a knife to his heart. But what did he have to offer her? He was a drifter, a ranch hand with no property, no real prospects. She deserved better than a man who owned nothing but a horse and saddle, who had been running from settling down for the past 7 years. Still, he could not help the way he felt, could not stop his heart from reaching toward her like a plant toward the sun. On the 3rd day after the storm, the temperature rose and the snow began to melt rapidly. Ethan scouted the road and found it passable, at least as far as he could see. He returned to the wagon to find Willa nursing Thomas, and his breath caught at the sight of them bathed in morning sunlight. She looked up when he entered, and the smile she gave him was so warm and genuine that he almost confessed everything right then and there. "The road is clear," he said instead. "I can fix your wagon wheel and we can get you to Eureka today." Something flickered in Willa's eyes, something that looked almost like disappointment, but it was gone so quickly Ethan thought he might have imagined it. "That is wonderful," she said. "Clara will be so worried. I should have arrived over a week ago." Ethan set to work on the broken wheel, using tools from the wagon and sheer determination. It took several hours, but he managed to get it repaired well enough for the journey. He hitched his mare to the wagon, and Willa wrapped Thomas in blankets and settled herself on the seat beside Ethan. As they began the slow journey toward Eureka, Ethan was acutely aware of how close she was sitting, how good she smelled despite their days in the wagon, like milk and baby powder and something uniquely her. They talked as they traveled, but there was an undercurrent of tension now, an awareness of time running out. Ethan found himself driving slower than necessary, drawing out every minute they had left together. Willa kept sneaking glances at him when she thought he was not looking, and once when he looked over at the same time, their eyes met and held for a long moment before she looked away, a blush coloring her cheeks. Eureka appeared on the horizon in late afternoon, a prosperous mining town nestled in the mountains. The main street was busy with people going about their business, and several folks turned to stare at the wagon as Ethan drove through. He felt his heart sinking with every turn of the wheels, bringing them closer to goodbye. Willa directed him to a neat white house on the edge of town, and before they had even stopped, a woman came running out the door. She was a few years older than Willa, with the same chestnut hair and green eyes, and she was crying as she ran. "Willa," she screamed. "Oh my God, Willa, we have been so worried. We were about to send out search parties, but the storm was so bad and then the roads were impassable, and I thought you were dead, and oh my God, is that the baby?" "You had the baby." Willa climbed down from the wagon, moving carefully, and her sister threw her arms around her, hugging her tightly. A man came out of the house as well, presumably Clara's husband, and he helped Ethan carry Willa's belongings inside. The house was warm and comfortable, clearly prosperous from mining investments, and Clara fussed over Willa and Thomas like a mother hen. Ethan stood awkwardly in the front room, hat in his hands, feeling very much like an outsider. This was Willa's family, her future. He had no place here. But when he turned to leave, Willa caught his arm. "Wait," she said. "Please, Clara, Henry, this is Ethan McCrae. He saved my life. He delivered Thomas during the blizzard and took care of us, and I do not even know how to begin to repay him." Clara immediately began thanking him profusely, and Henry shook his hand with genuine gratitude. They insisted he stay for dinner, and Ethan found himself unable to refuse, even though he knew it would only make leaving harder. The meal was delicious, the first real food he had eaten in days, and the conversation flowed easily. But Ethan could barely taste anything, could barely focus on what was being said. All he could think about was that after this meal, he would leave and probably never see Willa again. When dinner was finished, Ethan stood to go. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said. "But I should get back to the Morrison Ranch. They will be wondering where I am." "Of course," Henry said, "but you will always be welcome here any time. You saved my sister-in-law and nephew. That is a debt we can never fully repay." "There is no debt," Ethan said. He looked at Willa, who was holding Thomas and staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Take care of yourself, Willa, and take care of that boy. He is something special." "Wait," Willa said, standing up quickly. "Ethan, please wait. Can I talk to you outside for a moment, alone?" Clara and Henry exchanged knowing looks but said nothing as Willa handed Thomas to her sister and followed Ethan out onto the porch. The evening air was cold and crisp, and their breath formed clouds in the fading light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I do not want you to go," Willa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that is selfish and probably improper, and I should not be saying this when my husband has only been dead for a month, but I cannot let you walk away without telling you the truth. These past few days with you have been the most extraordinary of my life, not despite the circumstances, but because of them. Because you were there. Because you were strong and kind and gentle and everything I never knew I needed. I think I am falling in love with you, Ethan McCrae, and I do not want to lose you." Ethan felt like his heart was going to explode. "You are falling in love with me," he repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," Willa said, tears streaming down her face now. I know it is too soon and too fast and people will talk, but I do not care. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. When I thought I was going to die in that wagon, the thing that terrified me most was never seeing you again. Not never meeting my son, but never seeing you. Does that make me a terrible person? No, Ethan said fiercely, stepping forward and taking her hands in his. No, it makes you honest and brave, which is exactly what you are, and you are not alone in feeling this way. I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you in that wagon. I have spent 3 days trying to figure out how I could possibly walk away from you, and I could not come up with a single good reason. I love you, Willa Nelson. I love you and I love your son, and I want to be part of your lives if you will have me. Are you sure? Willa asked, searching his face. I come with complications. A baby, a dead husband people will remember, a scandal if we move too quickly. I have never been more sure of anything, Ethan said. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. I know it will not be easy, people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. All I care about is you. Then kiss me, Willa whispered. Please, Ethan, kiss me. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, and it was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope, and a future neither of them had dared to dream of just days before. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through their tears. So what happens now? Willa asked, lacing her fingers through his. Now we figure it out together, Ethan said. I will talk to the Morrisons, see if I can get work here in Eureka. We will court properly, give it enough time that the talk dies down. And when the time is right, if you will have me, I will marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy. I will have you, Willa said without hesitation, but only if you promise to also let me make you happy. This has to be equal, Ethan. A true partnership. Deal, Ethan said, sealing it with another kiss. They stood on that porch until the stars came out, talking about their future, about their dreams and hopes and fears. Inside, Clara and Henry were taking care of Thomas, giving Willa and Ethan the time and space they needed. When they finally went back inside, hand in hand, Clara took one look at their faces and burst into happy tears. The months that followed were not easy. True to his word, Ethan found work at a ranch near Eureka, close enough that he could visit Willa regularly but maintaining enough propriety to quiet the gossips. He was there every Sunday for dinner, and during the week, he would often stop by in the evenings, sitting on the porch with Willa while she rocked Thomas to sleep. They talked about everything under the sun, learning each other's quirks and habits, building a foundation of friendship that would support the love they already felt. Thomas thrived, growing from a tiny newborn into a chubby, happy baby who smiled every time he saw Ethan. Ethan fell completely in love with the boy, reading to him from storybooks and teaching him to laugh by making silly faces. Willa would watch them together with her heart in her eyes, amazed at how gentle and patient Ethan was, how naturally he took to being a father figure. 6 months after the blizzard, when the spring wildflowers were blooming across the mountain meadows, Ethan asked Willa to marry him properly. Down on one knee with a simple gold ring he had saved every penny to buy. She said yes through happy tears, and they were married a month later in a small ceremony at the local church with Clara and Henry as witnesses. Thomas, now able to sit up on his own, wore a tiny suit and behaved perfectly during the ceremony, as if he understood the importance of the day. Ethan and Willa moved into a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but clean and comfortable with room for their growing family. Ethan continued to work at the ranch, saving money toward his dream of buying his own land someday. Willa took in sewing to contribute, her skilled needlework in high demand among the mining wives who wanted fashionable dresses. They worked hard, but they were happy in a way that both of them had never imagined possible. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic toddler who called Ethan Papa from his first words, never knowing any other father. Ethan treasured that gift, loving Thomas as fiercely as if the boy carried his blood. They would spend Sundays together as a family, picnicking by the creek in summer and building snowmen in winter, creating the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. 2 years after their wedding, Willa became pregnant again. This time there was no blizzard, no emergency, just a smooth pregnancy and a delivery attended by the town doctor in their comfortable home. Their daughter came into the world on a bright June morning, a healthy baby girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Sarah Elizabeth McCrae, and Thomas was absolutely enchanted with his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. Ethan looked at his family gathered in their small house and felt a contentment he had never thought possible. He had spent so many years running from connection, from the vulnerability that came with love, but Willa and the children had shown him that the risk was worth it. Yes, loving meant you could be hurt, could lose everything, but it also meant experiencing joy so profound it took your breath away. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard while Sarah slept in her mother's arms. "I am thinking about that night in the blizzard," Ethan said honestly. "About how I almost rode past your wagon. The storm was so bad and I was so focused on just surviving and I almost kept going." "But you did not," Willa said softly. "You stopped, you helped, you saved us." "You saved me too," Ethan said, reaching over to take her free hand. "Before I met you, I was just existing, just drifting from day to day without any real purpose. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something, to believe in the future. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living." "We gave those things to each other," Willa corrected gently. "That is what makes it so special." Thomas came running up to the porch then, breathless and excited, a firefly cupped carefully in his hands. "Look, Papa, I caught one. Can we keep it?" Ethan knelt down to his son's level, examining the glowing insect. "He is beautiful, but I think he would be happier outside with his friends. What do you think?" Thomas considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, we should let him go." He opened his hands and watched with wonder as the firefly rose up into the darkening sky, its light blinking on and off as it rejoined the dance of its fellows. "Good choice, buddy," Ethan said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Now let us get you cleaned up for bed." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Willa lay in bed together, wrapped in each other's arms. Through the window, they could see the stars shining brilliantly in the Nevada sky, the same stars that had been hidden by the blizzard on the night they met. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if that storm had not happened?" Willa asked quietly. "All the time," Ethan admitted. "I try not to, because it makes me realize how close I came to missing all of this. But in a strange way, I am grateful for the storm. It brought us together." "Me too," Willa said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I feel guilty sometimes for being so happy. Jacob was a good man, and he did not deserve to die so young. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this." Ethan had wondered the same thing many times. He tightened his arms around Willa and said carefully, "I think he would be grateful that you and Thomas were not alone, that someone was there to help when you needed it most. And I think he would want you to be happy, to have a full life. Love is not a finite resource, Willa. You can honor Jacob's memory and still love me. There is room in your heart for both." "You are right," Willa said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And I do love you, Ethan McCrae, more than I ever thought possible. "I love you too," Ethan said. "Always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Ethan finally saved enough money to buy a small ranch of his own, 50 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it. It was not large or fancy, but it was theirs, the first property Ethan had owned since his father lost their ranch back in Texas. He and Willa worked side by side to build it up, raising cattle and horses and teaching Thomas everything he needed to know about ranching. Thomas grew into a fine young man, strong and honest with a gift for working with horses. He remembered nothing of the blizzard or his birth father, his earliest memories all featuring Ethan as Papa. But when he turned 16, Willa sat him down and told him the truth about his birth, about Jacob and the wagon and the night of the blizzard. She wanted him to know his history, to understand that he came from two good men. Thomas took the news with maturity beyond his years. "Papa Ethan is my real father," he said firmly. "Biology does not change that, but I am grateful to Jacob for giving me life and for loving my mother. I wish I could have known him." "He would have been very proud of the man you are becoming," Willa said, hugging her son tightly. Sarah grew into a spirited, independent girl with her father's stubbornness and her mother's quick wit. She loved horses even more than Thomas did, spending every spare moment in the barn or riding across their land. Ethan taught her everything he knew, never trying to restrict her because she was a girl. Willa encouraged her daughter's independence while also making sure she learned the practical skills she would need, whether she chose to marry or make her own way in the world. 3 years after Sarah's birth, Willa and Ethan welcomed another son, whom they named James Robert McCrae. He was a calm, thoughtful child who loved books and learning, completely different from his energetic older siblings, but fitting perfectly into their family. And 2 years after James came another daughter, Anna Grace, who had her father's gray eyes and a sunny disposition that could charm anyone. The house that had once seemed so spacious was now filled to bursting with children and love and laughter. Money was sometimes tight, especially during harsh winters or dry summers, but the McCraes always had enough. More importantly, they had each other, a bond that had been forged in Firelight during a blizzard and strengthened through years of choosing each other every single day. When Thomas turned 21, he brought home a young woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch, and it was clear to everyone that he was head over heels in love. Ethan and Willa approved immediately, seeing in Elizabeth the same strength and kindness that had brought them together. The wedding was held at the McCrae Ranch on a beautiful summer day, and as Ethan walked Thomas's birth mother down the aisle to give her son away, he felt the profound rightness of the moment. Jacob would be proud, Willa whispered to him as they watched Thomas say his vows. "So would my father," Ethan whispered back. "We broke the cycle, Willa. We built something that will last," and it did last. As the years turned into decades, the McCrae Ranch prospered and grew. Sarah eventually married a veterinarian and started a horse breeding operation that became known throughout Nevada. James became a teacher, educating the children of Eureka and the surrounding ranches. Anna married her childhood sweetheart and settled nearby, giving Ethan and Willa even more grandchildren to love and spoil through it all. Ethan and Willa remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings, watching the sun set over their land, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. They still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. They still looked at each other with the wonder of people who knew they had found something rare and precious. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed half of Eureka. As the party wound down and the younger grandchildren fell asleep on blankets under the stars, Thomas stood up to make a speech. 30 years ago, he began, my mother and I were caught in a blizzard. She was alone, widowed, and about to give birth in the worst conditions imaginable. And then a cowboy appeared out of the storm. He could have kept riding, focused on his own survival, but he did not. He stopped. He helped. He delivered me by firelight in a covered wagon, and in doing so, he changed all of our lives forever. Thomas paused, his eyes shining with emotion. Papa Ethan, you taught me what it means to be a man, not through violence or bravado, but through kindness and hard work and showing up every single day. You taught me that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and love. And Mama, you taught me that strength comes in many forms, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that love is worth fighting for. The two of you built something extraordinary here, Thomas continued, gesturing to the assembled family. Not just this ranch, but this family, this legacy of love and hard work and choosing each other. We are all here because of that night in the blizzard, because two people found each other in the worst circumstances and chose to build something beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you for showing us all what love really looks like. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Thomas sat down. Ethan pulled Willa close, kissing her temple as their children and grandchildren applauded. He looked around at the faces of the family they had created together and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Every choice he had made, every hardship he had endured, had led him to that moment in the blizzard when he heard Willa's cry for help. And choosing to stop, choosing to help, had given him everything that mattered. "What are you thinking?" Willa asked, echoing the question she had asked so many times over the years. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man alive," Ethan said. "And I am thinking about that night in the blizzard, about how terrified I was and how inadequate I felt. I had no idea what I was doing, delivering a baby by firelight in a storm. But I did it because you needed me, and because even then, in those first few minutes, I knew you were someone special." "I knew you were special too," Willa said. "The moment I looked into your eyes, even through all that pain and fear, I felt safe. I knew you were going to save us. And you did, in so many more ways than just that night." They sat together as the party continued around them, watching their family celebrate. Thomas and Elizabeth were dancing with their 3 children. Sarah was showing one of the grandchildren how to properly hold a baby horse. James was deep in conversation with his father-in-law about irrigation techniques. Anna was organizing games for the younger children, her laughter ringing out across the yard. "We did good," Ethan said softly. "We did better than good," Willa corrected. "We built a life together, a family, a legacy. And it all started with you being brave enough to stop in a blizzard, and me being brave enough to tell you I loved you." "I would make the same choices again," Ethan said. "Every single one. The only thing I would change is that I would have kissed you sooner." Willa laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been 30 years ago. "You kissed me plenty soon enough. Any sooner and it would have been scandalous." "It was already scandalous," Ethan pointed out. The widow and the drifter falling in love over a newborn baby. People talked for years. "Let them talk," Willa said. "We know the truth. We know what we built together, and look at where we are now. I would not change a single thing." As the evening deepened and the stars came out, the family gradually dispersed to their various homes and guest rooms. The grandchildren were carried inside, sleepy and happy. The adults lingered for a while, reluctant to let the magical evening end, but eventually they too said their goodnights and retired. Finally, Ethan and Willa were alone on their porch, just as they had been countless times before. The night was cool and clear, with no hint of the blizzard that had brought them together so many years ago. A soft breeze carried the scent of grass and horses and home. "You remember what you promised me that night in the wagon?" Willa asked. "When I was so scared and in so much pain." "I told you I would not let anything happen to you or the baby," Ethan said. "I promised to take care of you." "And you have," Willa said. "Every single day for 30 years you have kept that promise. You have taken care of me and Thomas and all of our children. You have given me a life beyond anything I dared to dream of. I want you to know that I see it, Ethan. I see all the hard work and sacrifice. I see how you put us first always. And I love you for it." Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. After all these years, Willa could still move him to tears with her words, with the depth of love and understanding between them. "You have given me just as much," he said roughly. "You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. Before you, I was just existing. With you, I am truly alive." They held each other close as the night deepened, two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come. Inside the house, baby Thomas's first son cried softly, and his mother's gentle voice soothed him back to sleep. In another room, Sarah's youngest daughter dreamed of horses running wild across open fields. James's boy slept with a book still open on his chest, dreaming of faraway places. Anna's twins were tangled together in sleep the way they had been in the womb, inseparable even in dreams. This was the legacy of that night in the blizzard. Not just the children and grandchildren, though they were precious beyond measure. The real legacy was the love that had started it all, the choice two strangers had made to trust each other, to be vulnerable, to build something together. That love had rippled outward, touching everyone it encountered, creating a family bound not just by blood, but by the daily choice to show up, to care, to persevere. As Ethan and Willa finally went inside and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines of 30 years of marriage, they both felt the profound gratitude of people who knew they had been given a gift. Not everyone got a second chance at happiness. Not everyone found their person in a blizzard. Not everyone built a love that lasted through decades of challenges and triumphs. But they had. Against all odds, against the expectations of society, against the ghost of a dead husband and the reputation of a drifter, they had chosen each other. And that choice, made first in a firelit wagon during a raging storm, had been the best decision either of them had ever made. They climbed into bed, Willa curling into Ethan's side the way she had every night for 30 years. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close, and she sighed contentedly. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Ethan whispered back. "Always and forever." Outside, the Nevada sky was ablaze with stars, the same stars that had shone down on a desperate woman in a broken wagon and the cowboy who stopped to help her. The same stars that had witnessed a birth by firelight and the beginning of a love story that would span decades. The same stars that would shine down on the McCrae ranch for generations to come, watching over a family built on courage and choice and love. The years continued to pass gently for Ethan and Willa McCrae. They grew older together with grace, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining lines that told the story of a life well lived. But their love never aged. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more profound with each passing year. Thomas and Elizabeth eventually took over the main operations of the ranch, allowing Ethan to step back and enjoy his later years. He still worked every day, because ranching was in his blood now, but the backbreaking labor fell to younger shoulders. He spent his time training horses, teaching his grandchildren to ride, and sitting on the porch with Willa, watching the world go by. Sarah's horse breeding operation expanded until it was known throughout the West. Buyers came from as far as California and Texas to purchase her carefully bred stock. She always credited her father with teaching her everything she knew, but Ethan would shake his head and say she had a gift that went beyond teaching. She understood horses on an instinctive level, could gentle the wildest mustang and coax speed from the laziest mare. James became the headmaster of the school in Eureka, respected throughout the community for his fairness and dedication to his students. He never forgot that his father had worked hard to make sure all the McCrae children received good educations, and he was passionate about extending that opportunity to every child, regardless of their family's financial situation. Anna and her husband built a homestead on a corner of the McCrae land, raising sheep alongside their growing family. Her children were always underfoot at the main ranch house, and Willa loved having the constant chaos and noise of grandchildren. She baked cookies and told stories and sewed clothes for the ever-expanding next generation. When Ethan turned 65, the family threw him a birthday party that drew half of Eureka. People came from ranches 50 miles away, all of them with stories about how Ethan had helped them at some point over the years. He had delivered more babies during emergencies, using the skills he first learned that night with Willa. He had helped neighbors rebuild after fires and floods. He had donated beef to families struggling through hard times. He had trained horses for young people who could not afford to pay him. "You are beloved," Willa told him that night as they lay in bed, exhausted from the celebration. "Do you realize that? You have touched so many lives, helped so many people. You are a pillar of this community." "I just did what needed doing," Ethan said uncomfortably. He had never been comfortable with praise or attention. "That is exactly why people love you," Willa said. "You do what needs doing without expecting recognition or reward. You are a good man, Ethan McCrae, the best man I have ever known." "I am only good because you made me want to be better," Ethan said. "Before you, I was angry at the world, bitter about losing my father's ranch, closed off from real connection. You opened my heart and showed me what was possible. Everything good in my life flows from that night in the blizzard. Then we saved each other," Willa said softly. "Because I was drowning in grief and fear, and you gave me hope and love and a future I never thought I would have. We are even, you and I, perfect partners." They fell asleep holding hands as they had every night for over 40 years, their breathing synchronizing in the way of long married couples. Outside, the ranch was quiet, the cattle settled, the horses dozing in their stalls, the world at peace. When Ethan turned 70, he and Willa made the decision to sign the ranch over to Thomas officially, though they continued to live in the main house. Thomas and Elizabeth had proven themselves more than capable, and the operation was thriving under their management. The younger McCraes had expanded into timber as well as cattle, diversifying in a way that Ethan approved of wholeheartedly. "I am proud of you," Ethan told Thomas on the day they signed the papers. "You have taken what your mother and I built and made it even better. You are the son any man would be proud to call his own." Thomas, now a man of 46 with gray streaking his dark hair, had tears in his eyes. "You gave me everything, Papa. A home, a name, a family, a future. I am the man I am because of you and Mama." "You are the man you are because of your own choices," Ethan corrected gently. "Your mother and I just provided the foundation. You built the house." The grandchildren continued to grow and marry and have children of their own. Ethan and Willa became great-grandparents, delighting in the new generation. Willa would sit in her rocking chair with a great-grandbaby in her arms, and Ethan would watch her with the same love and wonder he had felt 45 years ago when she first held newborn Thomas. They talked often about that night in the blizzard, the turning point of both their lives. It had become their origin story, told and retold to children and grandchildren, who never tired of hearing about the cowboy who stopped in a storm and delivered a baby by firelight. "Do you think you would have stopped if you had known how much your life was about to change?" one of the great-grandchildren asked Ethan one day. Ethan thought about it seriously, wanting to give an honest answer. "I like to think I would have," he said finally. "But the truth is, I do not know what I would have done if I had known everything that would follow. The love, yes, but also the responsibility, the fear of not being good enough, the hard work of building a life together. It might have scared me away." "But you did stop," the little girl said. "And you were not scared away." "No," Ethan agreed, smiling. "I was not scared away. Because once I met your great-grandmother, once I looked into her eyes and saw her strength and courage, I could not imagine being anywhere else. Love is not always a choice, but staying in love, working at it every day, that is a choice. And I chose your great-grandmother every single day for 50 years. When Ethan and Willa celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, the celebration was even larger than their 30th. The ranch could barely contain all the family members who came, along with friends and neighbors from across the county. There was music and dancing and enough food for an army. Telegrams arrived from as far away as San Francisco and Denver, from people whose lives had been touched by the McCraes over the decades. But the most meaningful moment came late in the evening, when Thomas stood to make another speech. He was 64 years old now, a grandfather himself, but his voice still carried the emotion of the young man who had learned the truth about his birth. 50 years ago, Thomas said, my mother made the bravest decision of her life. She admitted that she had fallen in love with the cowboy who delivered me in a blizzard, even though it had only been a few months since my birth father died. She risked scandal and judgment because she knew that what she had found with Ethan was real and worth fighting for. He paused, looking at Ethan and Willa seated at the head table, their hands intertwined. And Ethan made the equally brave decision to love not just my mother, but me too. He chose to be my father when he did not have to be. He chose to take on a ready-made family and all the complications that came with it. And he never once made me feel like I was anything other than his beloved son. Thomas's voice broke, and he had to pause to collect himself. The greatest gift you can give a child is to love their mother or father. And Papa, you loved Mama with everything you had. You showed me what a good marriage looks like, what partnership and respect and daily choice looks like. You showed me how to be a husband and a father. And Mama, you showed me that strength and gentleness can coexist, that vulnerability is not weakness, that love is worth the risk. 50 years, Thomas continued. 50 years of choosing each other, of building together, of facing whatever came with united strength. You two are the foundation of everything this family has become, and we are all better people because of your example. Happy anniversary and thank you for everything. As the family applauded and cheered, Ethan and Willa stood and embraced, tears streaming down both their faces. They had lived long enough to see the fruits of their love, to know that what they had built would outlast them, would ripple forward through generations. It was a blessing beyond anything they had imagined that night in the blizzard, when they were just two desperate people trying to survive a storm. The years after their 50th anniversary were gentle ones. Ethan's body began to betray him, his joints stiffening with arthritis, his steps growing slower. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Willa never wavered. She too aged, her once steady hands growing tremulous, her vibrant energy gradually fading. But she remained beautiful to him, the girl in the wagon who had stolen his heart and never given it back. They spent their days sitting together, holding hands, watching the ranch that had become their legacy. They talked about everything and nothing the way old couples do, comfortable in silences that spoke volumes. And every night before they fell asleep, they told each other, "I love you." The same 3 words they had exchanged for over 50 years, never losing their meaning or power. On a crisp autumn day when Ethan was 78 and Willa was 77, they sat on their porch and watched the leaves turn gold and red. The air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter, of harvest time and preparation. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter bright and joyful, and Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked him suddenly. Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. Everything I did, every choice I made led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I have one regret," Willa said quietly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. "What is it?" "I regret that I did not meet you sooner," she said. "I wish we had had more time together. 53 years seems like a lot, but it still is not enough. I want more." "So do I," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "But we have to be grateful for what we have had. And Willa, what we have had has been extraordinary. How many people can say they loved their whole lives? That they built something lasting? That they got there happily ever after?" "You are right," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We are lucky, so very lucky." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The great-grandchildren were called inside for dinner, and the ranch settled into evening quiet. Ethan and Willa remained on the porch, 2 people who had weathered every storm together, who had chosen each other every single day, who had built a love that would outlast them both. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ethan thought back to that night in the blizzard, to the moment he heard Willa's cry for help and made the choice to stop. It had been the defining moment of his life, the choice that led to everything that mattered. And he knew that if he had it to do over again, he would make the same choice without hesitation, because love, real love, was worth any risk. It was worth the fear and vulnerability and hard work. It was worth everything and more. "I love you," he said to Willa, as he had said countless times before. "I love you too," she replied, as she always did, "forever and always." And there, on the porch of the ranch they had built together, with their family safe and thriving around them and the stars shining overhead, Ethan and Willa McCrae held each other close and gave thanks for a blizzard that had brought them together and a love that had carried them through a lifetime.